Let's move on to the human reproductive system. And we'll start with female reproductive anatomy and physiology. And the female sex organs, the primary female sex organs, are the gonads or the ovaries, which, as you can see, are paired. You got one on each side. And those are connected loosely to the uterus, which is where the embryo and fetus would develop. And they're connected also by the oviducts, which are also sometimes called uterine tubes or fallopian tubes. And then you've got the vagina, which is the canal via which sperm will come in and baby will come out. So sperm will come in, come up the oviduct, and it's around right here actually, like 2/3 of the way out, that the sperm will usually fertilize the egg. And if you look at the cross section here, again you can see the canal, which is the vagina. You can see the uterus and the cervix, which is the part of the uterus that dips down into the vagina. You can see the layers of the uterus. You've got the myometrium here with the muscle that squeezes the baby out, and the endometrium on the inside, which is where the embryo is going to be deposited and planted. And you can also see the placement here of the vagina between the urethra and the rectum. And you can see the external genitalia here. And the external genitalia broadly is called the vulva. And it includes labia minora on the inside and labia majora on the outside, which enclose the vestibule. And then the clitoris on the front. And all of these things, all this anatomy really is analogous to stuff that you'd find in the male reproductive system. So, essentially, unless the hormone that's produced by the SRY gene in the Y chromosome is produced, then we all end up becoming female. And so the ovaries are from the same tissue that will become the testes in a male. The labia majora is from the same tissue that will become the scrotum in the male. The labia minora becomes the base of the penis, or the same tissue, I should say. The same tissue that becomes the head of the penis or the glans penis in the male will become the clitoris in the female, which has its own glans or head, and has its own prepuce, which we call foreskin in males. That's what is cut off if the male is circumcised, and it's called a clitoral hood in females. The eggs are made inside the ovaries, and they are surrounded by a group of supportive cells, which is called the follicle. And every oocyte, or immature egg, has a follicle around it. And these oocytes begin their production before the female is even born. When she is 5 or 6 months along as a fetus in her mother's uterus, she begins making all the oocytes she will ever have for her life. And this process of production of eggs is called oogenesis. And so these get arrested early in production, and then they finish production once a month once the female hits puberty. So that once a month during puberty, one egg or a small group of eggs will begin to grow and continue the process of meiosis. The follicle will grow as well and produce more estrogen. And eventually you will have ovulation, which is when the egg erupts out of the ovary. And what's left of the follicle in the ovary turns into something called the corpus luteum, which is pretty important. It secretes some estrogen or estradiol, which is the type of estrogen we're talking about, and also progesterone. And that maintains the internal lining of the endometrium from the uterus and allows a fertilized egg to implant and continue. If the egg's not fertilized, the corpus luteum will eventually break down and go away. But if it is fertilized, that conceptus, that developing embryo, makes a hormone called HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin, which tells the corpus luteum to stick around, keep producing progesterone, and then you keep that endometrium thick and full of nutrients, so you won't undergo menstruation. HCG, by the way, that hormone, is what pregnancy tests are generally looking for. So when you pee on a stick or whatever, if it pops up positive, it's because it detected HCG. In addition to the typical parts of the reproductive system, another organ that's associated with the reproductive system are the mammary glands, and those are there for after the birth of the kiddo, so that you are able to produce milk to support the new baby. And you have mammary glands even when you don't have a baby, but they're not active, they're not producing milk until the hormones shift during pregnancy, and then they get bigger and they begin producing milk at the end, and then they produce milk as long as a baby is nursing. That nursing of the baby is what stimulates the production of more milk. The male reproductive system is much more external than the female reproductive system. So we all know about the penis and its main function, aside from urination, which is the day-to-day thing, because the urethra is a pathway for both urine and also sperm. But its main reproductive function is to deposit sperm into the female reproductive tract. But we also have testes that are external, and they are hanging in a sac called the scrotum. And the reason those are external is not for fun. It's a really risky strategy to have your reproductive organs vulnerable outside the body. But sperm are produced more effectively at a lower temperature than your body's 98.6 degrees. And so the fact that they're hanging outside the body allows them to be a little cooler and more effectively make sperm. If you're trying to have a baby and you're having trouble, they might recommend that you wear, for instance, boxers instead of briefs so that you keep them cool. But your body has muscles in the scrotum that help regulate that temperature. So on a cold day, they may pull the testes back closer to the body to keep them warm. And on a hot day, they may relax the muscles and allow them to hang a little further from the body. Within the scrotum, you have seminiferous tubules, which are little tiny tubules where the actual sperm are produced. And once they're produced, and this happens continuously, once you hit puberty, throughout your lifetime, just continuous production of sperm, they are stored and they mature in this thing here called the epididymis. And when I say mature, I mean they get their tails, but also they get an acrosome, which is like this sac of enzymes that goes on the head of the sperm that will help them burrow into the egg when it's time to fertilize it. Now this is where they hang out until it's time to go, and when there's an ejaculation event, they will move through the vas deferens or ductus deferens, which goes up over the bladder and down here. And you have two testes, so you have two vas deferens. Each of them will join together with fluid from the seminal vesicle. Now the seminal vesicle produces most of your semen, or at least the majority. Up until this point, you've had a little bit of fluid, but mostly just sperm, right? And this produces fluid that helps support the sperm. So they're tiny, they're packing light, so they don't have a whole lot of nutrients, for instance, to keep going into the female reproductive tract. So like the sugars and nutrients that they need to make ATP are primarily found in the semen. So those join together in something called the ejaculatory duct, and now this duct is going through the prostate. And you have two ejaculatory ducts, one from each side, and they dump together in the urethra. Now the urethra comes down from your bladder because it's also where urine goes. But starting here in the prostate, it will also be a path for sperm and semen. Prostate also makes a lot of the semen. So the seminal vesicle and the prostate together make the vast majority of your semen. And this urethra comes through here. It's called the prostatic urethra up here in the prostate, membranous urethra in between the prostate and the penis. And in the penis, it's called either the penile or the spongy urethra because it's in this spongy erectile tissue. And then on the way out, there you go. The penis also has a glans penis, which is what you call the head of the penis, again, which is much like the glands in the clitoris. And just like the clitoris, it has a prepuce. But again, where in the clitoris, that's considered the clitoral hood, here the prepuce is called foreskin. There's another gland that produces something that's sort of kind of part of the ejaculate, but it's really pre-ejaculate. And this bulbourethral gland produces something that comes out right before the bulk of the semen and sperm. And because urine is usually a little acidic, that can be harmful to sperm. This produces an alkaline solution that clears out the rest of the urethra, and it also produces some lubrication for the head of the penis. The production of gametes is called gametogenesis, and this happens in males and females, although you are producing different gametes. And the process, while it has a lot of similarities, also has some major differences. Sperm are small, motile, got to pass from the male to the female. Eggs are larger and must have nutrition to take care of itself before the placenta, for instance, is formed, and they carry out their function entirely within the female. Sperm production is called spermatogenesis, and this is continuous. It happens once puberty comes. It's just a continuous thing, and you make lots and lots of sperm, millions every day, and they only take about 7 weeks to develop. Whereas the production of eggs, which is called oogenesis, begins, as I mentioned before, when the female is a fetus in her mother's uterus, 5 or 6 months along. Each of these eggs will begin the process, and they'll get arrested early on, and they won't continue the process until puberty, when once a month some of them will continue the process. And so it unfolds over years or even decades, the process of oogenesis. Other than issues of timing, the other main difference between spermatogenesis and oogenesis has to do with the fact that all 4 of the products of meiosis from a single primary spermatocyte, all 4 of those products will become a functional sperm, whereas from a primary oocyte, only one of those 4 cells will become a functional egg. And so meiosis we talked about last semester. You should hopefully be familiar with it. But the process, nuclear process is the same, but the processes around it are a little bit different. So here you can see inside the testes you have all these little tubules. Again, those are called seminiferous tubules, and that is actually where sperm are produced. And within, this is a cross-section of a piece of a seminiferous tubule, we start off with a spermatogonium. And a spermatogonium is a stem cell, and it undergoes mitosis, not meiosis, but mitosis, produces 2 genetically identical offspring, one of which remains a spermatogonium, and this is so that you can keep producing these over and over and over again. This one cell isn't used up by meiosis. But the other cell will become a primary spermatocyte, and a primary spermatocyte will undergo meiosis 1, produce 2 secondary spermatocytes, which are now haploid, because after meiosis 1 we're haploid, and then those secondary spermatocytes undergo meiosis 2, and you get 4 haploid spermatids, which will then get their tails and their acrosomes up in the epididymis, and they'll be ready to go. Oogenesis begins in the ovary with an oogonium. Just like a spermatogonium, the oogonium is a stem cell that will undergo mitosis, and it will produce 2 genetically identical offspring, one of which will remain an oogonium, the other of which will become a primary spermatocyte. And like a primary, it will become a primary oocyte. And like a primary spermatocyte, the primary oocyte will undergo meiosis 1. The difference is one of those 2 cells that it becomes is essentially nothing but DNA, and it's junked. Almost all of the cytoplasm goes into one of those 2 cells, and that is a secondary oocyte. The other thing we call a polar body. It's junk. And that secondary oocyte, just like a secondary spermatocyte, will undergo meiosis 2, but again, in that division, one of the 2 cells becomes a second polar body, which is junked, get rid of that DNA, and almost all the cytoplasm ends up in this one fertilized egg. So after meiosis, instead of 4 cells that are functional, like you have with spermatogenesis, you only have 1 functional egg. And this is a function of the fact that the egg has to be much bigger and carry the nutrition for that new zygote, if it gets fertilized, to survive. And this happens, again, in the ovary. This primary oocyte is around when you're a fetus. We are arrested in prophase 1 of meiosis until puberty, and then at puberty, once a month, some of these cells will continue on through meiosis 1, and then meiosis 2 doesn't actually happen until fertilization. So if there's not a fertilization event, the oocyte will never finish being produced. And again, what's left of that follicle after ovulation becomes the corpus luteum, which secretes progesterone, which is very important for maintaining that endometrial lining. The rest of development in humans is separated into trimesters. My wife has just finished her first trimester with our second kid here this week. And this is a time of radical change, but we're going to talk about the details of this development in the next chapter.